Welcome to the Big Success Podcast, cutting-edge conversations on business and personal success, as well as how to level up. Here's your host, #1 business coach in the world, Brad Sugars.
One of my great mentors, Dr. Ivan Meisner, joins us here today. They say he's the father of modern networking. I call him the godfather of networking. He's the founder and chief visionary officer of BNI, which is the biggest networking company for business people in the world. Great partner for us at Action Coach. More than $20 billion last year in past business. When it talk about scale, the man knows what he's talking about. His definition of success, though, really gave me a little spin on it different today. It's not something I've had from anybody before, and I think you'll love the way he looks at it. His philosophy on networking and giver's gain, all of these things are explained today. Dr. Ivan Meisner takes us through how to build great people and build great companies. Big Success Podcast. Here's Ivan Meisner. So, Ivan, I have to ask, what is your definition of success? What is success to you?
The one thing that I think is the same for most of us, and I talk about this in a book that I did many, many years ago called Masters of Success, and I think this applies to most successful people, is that success is the uncommon application of common knowledge. And I came to that conclusion because—
Hang on, say that again. Yeah. That's really important.
Success is the uncommon application of common knowledge. And I came to that conclusion when I interviewed, big names, Jack Canfield, Richard Branson, Mark Victor Hansen, Michael Gerber. I talked to people and I asked them, what's the secret to success? And they said, well, goals, hard work, focus, persistence, et cetera, et cetera. And then I asked members of BNI, the organization I founded, what do you think it takes to be successful? And you know what they said, Brad? They said goals, hard work, focus, persistence. It was the same answers. And then I asked students. I was teaching undergraduate school when I did this book, and I started asking students, what do you guys think it takes to be successful? And they said goals, hard work, focus, persistence. They did have one thing that nobody else had, and that was they said luck. And, I think the harder you work, the luckier you get. But other than that, it was the same answers. So that's when I came to the conclusion, and we talked about it in this book that I did 20 years ago, that success is the uncommon application of common knowledge. We basically know what it takes to be successful. But it's the uncommon application of that makes us truly successful.
Yeah, it's like, we all know an apple a day. We all know get out and walk every day. We all know those things. It's who does those things and does them at that level. So do you think over the years, your personal definition of success has changed for you?
Not really. I mean, in nuanced ways, quite possibly, but pretty much no, it's been the same for me.
So when do you feel you chose success? Was it as a kid, as a young man? Where did success become the choice for you?
It was in my 20s when I decided that I wanted to be amongst the best at what I do. And anyone who is interested, you can actually go to my blog, which is at ivanmeisner.com. 7 years ago, I posted, when I turned 60, I'm 67 now. When I turned 60, I posted my 40-year plan that I wrote in my 20s. I posted it when I turned 60. And basically what it said was my 20s, when I wrote this, was, my learning years. It was my educational years. My 30s were where I was going to pick a lane professionally and really strive for that. My 40s would be where I would build a reputation.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote this when I was in my mid 20s, and in my 50s where I would be at the top of my game. I would be one of the leading experts in whatever field it was, because I wasn't quite sure what field I was going to go into yet. And then my 60s and beyond were the time where I would be the elder statesman, where I would be the person that people go to ask for opinions.
I got to ask.
Yeah.
How did a 20-something kid have that much wisdom? Come on, where did that come from? Was it from, did you read something? What happened to make that a reality? Because that's not a normal 20-something kid.
I think it probably came from a book that I was given when I was probably about 16. It was actually, I first got it as an audio cassette from my football coach, Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz.
Got it.
And
Maxwell Maltz. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that goes way, way back, right? He wrote it in the 60s. And he talked about the servo mechanism of the mind and what you, I mean, it was the law of attraction before the law of attraction. He talked
Yeah.
about visualization, that, if you visualize what you want in your life, you're much more likely to be able to achieve it. And I think it was an outgrowth from that. And the funny thing is, I listened to that cassette tape so much, I broke it. And my coach gave me another one. And my fellow football players were like, dude, why are you listening to the cassette again? It's boring as hell. And I'm like, no, this is incredible. This could change your life. And they didn't get it, but I got it. And I think it did change my life.
Yeah. So let's go then to the Ivan Meisner formula for success. What do you think is the formula of how success happens?
Well, look, success happens in different ways for different people. People have different strengths. And I can tell you this, it's not about luck. It's definitely, some people tell me you got to have lucky breaks. Okay. I think I said this earlier, the harder you work, the luckier you get. And I'll tell you, this is a true story. I bought my big house in California. I now live in Austin, Texas, but I bought my big house in in Claremont, California. And somebody who I knew they were standing in front, they looked at it and they went, wow, you are really lucky. And I said, I can tell you how you can be as lucky as me. And he said, yeah, tell me, what's the secret? I said, okay, no, you'll do it differently, but this is how I became lucky. He said, yeah, tell me how you became lucky. I said, well, I went to college for 10 years. I wrote, 15 books. I mortgaged my house a couple of times. I worked 60 hours a week. I almost went bankrupt at least once or twice. And that's how I became that lucky. You can become as lucky as me if you do things like that. And he was like, yeah, I know. And I'm like, well, that's what luck is about.
That's funny. So what are the things, if you're sitting there with a young person today and you say, this is how success happens, do you have a formula for it or do you just give them a list of things?
I don't give them a formula per se, because I really believe in many ways it varies. What do you want to do? And the formula for success. Look, there are a few things, and I know you got some questions that probably would fit that formula. I'll give you one of them now. I think you want to be successful, you got to do 6 things 1,000 times, not 1,000 things 6 times. And I think so many business people are doing 1,000 things 6 times. And I keep this here because I talk to BNI members about this all the time. They're constantly chasing bright, shiny objects. It's like, ooh, look at that. Let's do that. And, they chase one bright, shiny object after another bright, shiny object, and they can't figure out why they're not successful. You want to be successful, you got to do 6 things 1,000 times. Now, 2 things. First, it doesn't have to be 6. It could be 5. It could be 7. But you got to do it over and over and over again. So what do? Well, you listen or watch podcasts like this. You go to YouTube pages with people who you trust. You find mentors, whether they're real in-person or virtual mentors. And in your field, because your field may have a different recipe for success. I mean, there are some general, like the one I just gave, but there might be other recipes for that success. You go to those mentors and you listen to them and you follow what they say has worked for them. And you got to trust that they are in fact successful before you follow what they say.
Who were some of those mentors for you? Obviously, Maxwell Maltz makes that list for the book, but who else was on that list?
I would say early on was Michael Gerber. I read the E-Myth right after I started BNI. It was probably 85, 86 that I read the E-Myth. And, Michael in the book talks about the fact that you got to work on the business, not in the business. And one of the things he said was write everything down as though you're going to franchise your business, even if you have no intention of franchising your business. I thought, wow, that's a great idea. I'm never going to franchise BNI, but what the heck? I'm going to write it down as though I did. And then like 4 years later, I'm like, wait a minute, why why can't I franchise
Yeah.
this? And I had it all written down. I had the manuals, the materials. It was just getting the legal documentation. And you know about that process. It was about doing that, but I had the manuals. And so Michael Gerber was certainly one. And here's the beauty of, you follow somebody and they make a difference in your life. I was doing a radio show down in San Diego. And Brad, this was back in the days where, there wasn't a technology like this where you could be in two different locations. I had to drive down to San Diego. I did the radio show. It was on. The next day, my office gets this phone call. And they say, hey, Ivan, there's some guy on the phone. He says his name is Michael Gerber. Do you know who he is? And I'm like, I forgot. On the radio show, they asked me this question and I gave the same answer. Michael Gerber made a difference for me. So next day, Michael calls and he says, look, the book's been out for a few years. I want to thank you for mentioning it. And we ended up meeting and he spent a weekend at my house and we became really good friends. And you never know those virtual mentors that you may have. You never know whether they may become true mentors, in-person mentors, friends. I mean, I just spoke to Michael last week. So I think mentorship is really important.
Yeah. So how do you feel that failure fits within the success model? What's your theory on failure's relationship with success?
I think failure is our tuition for success. And I think a lot of people don't get that. They fail at something.
Explain that more, because I've never heard it put that way. Failure is our tuition for success.
It is. That's our tuition. And we got to look at it that way. And let me tell you something. I've paid a lot of tuition over the years. I've made a lot of mistakes. And that means, by the way, that you've got to give grace to the people who work for you because they're going to make mistakes. I'll tell you a true story, Brad. I talk about if you want to scale, you got to you have to be able to delegate, and delegate means you delegate responsibility and authority. You have to give both, and we tend to give responsibility but not authority. So there was a woman who worked for me who had the authority to make decisions up to like $5,000, and by the way, you give them the authority over time once they are trained, right? You give them increasing authority. So she had authority to spend up to $5,000. Well, she made a $5,000 mistake. It cost me $5,000 and we did not get what we wanted out of it. And I called her into my office and I remember her saying to me, "Are you going to fire me?" I said, "Well, let's talk. What did we learn from this mistake?" And she said it was a mistake. She owned it. Yeah. She wasn't, defensive. And I said, what'd you learn from this? And she gave me a great answer about what she learned. And I said, if I were to keep you, what would you do differently? And she gave me a great answer as to what she would do differently. And then I said, no, I'm not going to fire you. And she said, "Oh God, I'm so relieved, but can I ask you why?" And I remember I said to her, "Because I just invested $5,000 in your training.
Yeah.
I'm not going to let you go, but you can't do something like that again." She's like, "I won't do anything like that again, I promise." And she didn't do it out of carelessness. That would have been different. If she was just being careless, she'd have been gone. But it was an honest mistake, and she learned from it. So failure is our tuition for success.
Yeah, if you're pushing boundaries, you're going to make mistakes. There's no two ways about it. Hey, you're on the Big Success Podcast. I'm Brad Sugars. We are here with Dr. Ivan Meisner. We're going to be back, and we're going to talk about his skills and things about networking. He's the godfather of it, I should say. Not the grandfather, the godfather of networking. So we'll be back in a moment.
You didn't start your business just to become a slave to it, but how do you get things done the way you want when you're not there? Brad Sugars walks you step by step through the entire process of systemizing your business in his book, Instant Systems. Pick up your copy today and start learning.
And you're back, Big Success Podcast. Ivan, I have to ask, relationships. How do we succeed at building great relationships?
I think it's about touch points. It's about staying connected with people. It's one of the reasons why in BNI we meet weekly. And, a lot of people say, "Oh my God, every week." Yeah, but nothing breaks up a relationship quicker than benign neglect. We all know that. People that we went to high school with, that we were friends, college with, that we were friends, and we just lost touch with them over the years. That's benign neglect. And when that happens, the relationship dissipates over time. And so it's about regular contact connections with people. By the way, and B and I, we meet weekly, but we used to have chapters that met twice a month. And you know what? They passed 50% less referrals. Well, we tested it again last year. The new team said, we want to try it one more time. People are complaining that they got to get together every week. So we want to try it one more time. So we tried it in 2022. Guess what? The chapters passed 50% less referrals than the chapters that were meeting every week. And so the relationships are the glue that holds the referral process together.
Right. So let's go to the start of relationships, making a new connection, out networking. And let's start with in general rather than in groups. Let's start with in general. How do people succeed at meeting new people, whether it's friends or business connects, either way?
Well, I mean, there's a number of things. When you go to a networking event, there's so many layers to this question. Kind of depends on whether you're an introvert or an extrovert. An extrovert has no problems meeting people. They're really good at that. The problem with an extrovert is that when they meet people, they can't shut up. They just they go on and on and on and on. And what's their favorite subject?
Themselves. Yeah.
So, it really depends. If you're an extrovert, you got to learn how to shut up and listen. A good networker has 2 ears and 1 mouth and uses them both proportionally. If you're an introvert, go to networking events with somebody you know who knows people there who can introduce you to people. Hey, let me introduce you to my friend Brad. Brad, he runs Action Coach, amazing guy, and you have somebody there who's your wingman, and they're the person who can introduce you around to other people. Now, the beauty of being an introvert, because there's a strength, is that they're good at listening. An introvert is like an interviewer. You're asking me questions and you're allowing me to elaborate. Introverts are pretty good at that. They're good at asking questions and allowing the other person to elaborate. And so there are strengths and weaknesses depending on what kind of behavioral style you have. And I know you understand behavioral styles very well. I know you've used DISC instruments in the past. I assume you still do. They're a great system to understand the behavioral characteristics of an individual. And so it varies a little bit, but let me just give you one more thing to remember.
Yeah.
You don't use networking as a face-to-face cold calling opportunity. I see that happen too often. Instead, people say, well, if I'm not there to sell, why am I there? You're there to work your way through what I call the VCP process: visibility, credibility, profitability. So first, you got to be visible. People have to know who you are and what you do. Then you establish credibility over time. Where they know who you are, they know what you do, they know you're good at it. And then and only then can you get to profitability, where people know who you are, they know what you do, they know you're good at it, and they're willing to refer business to you. And that requires a relationship.
Yeah, so let's talk about that then, getting that relationship, building it. What are some of the stepping stones to making that relationship or taking that relationship to the next level?
Well, let's start with the beginning. So in a couple of my books, I talk about the 24/7/30 process when you meet somebody. So you meet somebody for the first time, 24/7/30. Within 24 hours, reach out, connect with them. Say, hey, it was really great meeting you, Brad, at that event that we went to together yesterday. I loved our conversation on such and such, and I hope our paths cross again. And don't sell to them. Don't sell to them yet. Right? That's not a relationship. So within 7 days, connect with them on social media. Okay. Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever. In your conversation, find out what social media platform they like most. I learned this from my kids because when my kids were young, my eldest is in her 30s and my youngest is 30. I learned that if I called them, they wouldn't respond. If I texted them, the older one would, but the next one, it was WhatsApp. Now, this was 15 years ago, and I went to my late wife and I said, "What's WhatsApp? I don't know. I don't know what that is." So I signed up for WhatsApp so my daughter would respond. My second daughter. That was my son. He didn't like WhatsApp, but he was a gamer, and he was on a platform called Steam, and Steam had an instant messaging feature. And so I went to Steam. I bought a program so that I could instant message my son and have him respond. I tell you the story because you want to go where they are. That's the 7. Within 7 days, go to the platform that they're on and comment on a post that they have. Give some social support to what it is that you've seen that you like. And then within 30 days, and don't sell to them, by the way. Don't get on there. Oh my God, LinkedIn is horrible with this. People connect with me on LinkedIn, and then the next message they have is, would you like to buy my product? The worst ones are, I have a lead list for you. And I'm like, dude, did you even read my bio? Do you even know what I do? So, don't sell to them when you connect with them on social media. And then the 30 is that within 30 days, reach out to them and set up a one-to-one. And in that one-to-one, you say to them, I'd love to learn more about what you do. Maybe you'd be willing to learn a little bit about what I do. And then you have a really good one-to-one. And there's some techniques that you can use to do a great one-to-one. And even then, don't sell to them. You're not at credibility yet. You're just working your way towards credibility. So those are some of the kinds of things that you want to do to build that relationship.
Love it. Famous saying from Dr. Ivan Meisner, giver's gain. Tell me more about that one, or teach us about that one.
Well, giver's gain, I think, was one of the things that I absolutely did right when I started BNI, because I recognized early on that networking was more about farming than it was about hunting, that it was about cultivating relationships with other people. And to me, giver's gain is more than a phrase. It's a way of living one's life. It's a perspective to view and interact with the world. It's an attitude, not an expectation. And when it's applied properly, it'll change your life. And when it changes enough lives, it'll change the world.
Brilliant. Third paradigm. I've got the first, the new book just out. Actually, I'll get you. I won't explain what the perspective is. Give us the third paradigm.
Yeah, the third paradigm, let me give you the concept quickly and then tell you how the book is laid out. The first paradigm of business was competition, and it was the transition from the 1800s to the 1900s. The Galbraiths, the Gants, Frederick Taylor, Max Weber, they talked about productivity and competition. The second paradigm is cooperation, and that really kind of started with McGregor in the 50s and 60s, where he talked about theory X, theory Y, and talked about people being a resource. The people were important. Now, today we look at that and go like, yeah, isn't that obvious? But in the 50s and 60s, McGregor was getting bomb threats because people said, this is communism. It's like, no, people are a resource. So, and we need to care for them like a resource. So that was the second paradigm. The third paradigm is co-creation. And that's where people are getting together and actually creating something together. The best known example of co-creation is crowdsourcing. Crowdsourcing an idea, crowdsourcing a product, crowdsourcing a system. That's probably the best known. And I think that's the future. We surveyed 4,200 people to ask them about the benefits of this kind of collaboration and the weaknesses, the drawbacks. And we got some great results. And it's interwoven throughout the book. And let's give you one more. And okay, you can't tell anybody this, okay? This is just between you and I, Brad.
And the thousands of people listening, yes.
Well, there maybe those two. There's a story interwoven in between every chapter about Richard, and it's a true story. It's about Richard and the development of this online program, and it started as competition, and it went to cooperation, and then finally co-creation, where it came true. And we say it's a true story. We never say who Richard is until the last chapter. We give a hint. And the last chapter is an unusual chapter because the publisher interviewed the three authors. And the publisher said, is the story about Richard true? And my co-author said, yes, it's definitely true. And it is about one of the co-authors. And just between us. And your thousands and thousands of viewers and listeners. My middle name's Richard.
Quick secret. You're on the Big Success Podcast. We're going to come back and we're going to dive into the 4 right areas of co-creation. Then we're going to talk about scaling up with Dr. Ivan Meisner.
Dr. Ivan Meisner is the founder of BNI, the world's largest business networking organization. Dr. Meisner has written 29 books, including his newest, The Third Paradigm. To learn more about Dr. Meisner, please visit ivanmeisner.com.
So, Ivan, co-creation, Let's go through the 4 areas, that formula. I think it's really important to give people a broad brushstroke of it so when they read the book, they can really get deep into it.
Yeah, well, we took all of the data that we had, which we felt was really valuable, and we kind of came up with 4 categories that needed to be focused on, and we call them the 4 no's, the 4 KNOWS, the 4 no's. The 4 no's, in order to be effective at co-creation, is 1, focus. You have to have focus. The second is process. Now that you got this focus, what processes are you going to use to be successful at co-creation? The third is communication, absolutely key in making co-creation work. And the last is execution. How are you going to execute on the process of co-creation? And so we break it up. That's sort of our theoretical construct for the book, but we have hard data. So it's not just a book on theory. It's like, okay, here are the things you need to actually do for the 4 no's to work.
Love it. So I want to talk, and you've done a lot of work on this over the years, about scale. What is, in your mind, the difference, firstly, between someone who goes for, let's just use the million, and someone who goes for the billion? Someone who goes for okay and someone who goes for amazing. What's the difference in their mindset or their approach to things in the way you see it?
Well, I think it starts with a mindset of, Jim Collins in Good to Great. Good is the enemy of great. And I like to say, why accept mediocrity when excellence is an option? Excellence is an option. In order to achieve excellence, and in order to scale, you need to start by writing things down, like Michael Gerber said. You write processes down, and then you got to teach everyone about those processes. And you got to, at the same time, you got to create core values for your business, a vision statement, a mission statement, core values. And wherever you're at in your organization, if you don't have values yet, you got to create them, and then you got to share it like you share your training. And here's the thing about values, core values. If you don't create them and you don't train on them, somebody else will create them, and they may not be what you like. And so you got to get really, really good about your core values. And then it's a process. In the book, in Third Paradigm, we call it communication saturation, where you are constantly talking about an issue that's important to the business, and core values are important. So a mutual acquaintance of ours, Graham Weimiller, who's the CEO of BNI, one of the things that he incorporated into BNI was first BNI boot camp. Everybody's got to go through boot camp before you can actually start your job. And that takes a couple of weeks. And you go through BNI boot camp and you learn the core values. And then once you're on board, he starts every single meeting with, he lists the 7 core values, givers gain being one of them. And he says, pick somebody. And he said, tell us why that core value resonates with you and why. Tell us which one and why. Well, it's this constant reinforcement. And so you want to scale, you got to be good with your values, because culture eats strategy for breakfast. Then you got to write everything down. Then you got to teach everybody this program. Then you got to learn how to delegate effectively. And there's another really important one, as if you're the leader, you got to figure out what your flame is and what your wax is. Okay.
All right. You got me. All right. Explain that one.
Good. When you're working in your flame, you're on fire. You're excited. You're passionate about what you do. People can see it in the way you behave. They can hear it in your voice.
Yeah.
When you're working in your wax, just takes all your energy away. And people can see that in the way you behave, and they can hear that in your voice. I'll give you a quick story on an example. I learned this early on in the business, and so I was more and more, I was trying to work in my flame more than in my wax. And so one of the first positions I hired in BNI was a bookkeeper. Now, Brad, I can do bookkeeping. I know how to do it. I can read a financial statement. I just hate it. I just absolutely hate it. So I hired this bookkeeper. And in like her first month with me, she came into my office. She said, Ivan, our books were not balanced. They were off by 5 cents, pennies. Okay? They were off by 5 cents. It took me 2 hours, but I found it. The books are balanced. And I said, well done. I'm really proud of you. And I told a friend of mine that, and he said, did you reprimand her? And I said, why would I reprimand her? He said, because she spent 2 hours to find 5 cents. I said, no, I congratulated her. He said, why? I said, I'll tell you why. Because if it were $50, she wouldn't have gone home that night. She'd have been like, oh my God, we're off by $50. I'm going to find it. Me, I would have said, $50, close enough. Because it was my wax. But that was her flame, and she was going to find that money. God bless her. You want people to do their flame, which is your wax.
I mean, you've coached and educated tens of thousands of people live and obviously virtually hundreds of thousands through books and everything. What's the difference between someone who is like, they've got the $1 million goal and the person with the $1 billion goal? What is the difference between those two people?
I think it's mindset. I really do. And I'll be honest, I've never had $1 billion goal, although having said that, in the last 12 months, BNI generated 22.6 billion. That's billion with the B. Worth of thank you for closed business for our members, which means that's how much money our members made. Now, here's the awesome thing about that, Brad. There are 115 countries in the world that have a lower GDP, gross domestic product, according to the United Nations. 115 countries in the world that have a lower GDP than what BNI generated for our members in the last 12 months. So I think that was always my goal, was to generate billions of dollars in business for my members. I'm not a billionaire. I don't care. But how do you create that scaling mentality? I think it's absolutely a mindset. If you think you can or you think you can't, you'll be right. And I'll give you an example. We had Murali Mac Srinivasan, who's the global president for BNI. Mac told some chapters in India, there are chapters of BNI in the US that are $1 million chapters. They're passing $1 million in referrals. And they're like, really? $1 million? Not 1 million rupees, $1 million. Okay. So like 2 years later, he's back in this region, and they're like, we have $10 million chapters. And he looked at their numbers, and here's the thing, Brad. He didn't tell them it was $1 million a year. He didn't think to say that. They thought he meant $1 million a month. These 10 chapters were doing $1 million, not rupees, dollars a month, because they didn't realize, they didn't have this box of $1 million a year. It was $1 million. So they just assumed he meant $1 million a month. And they were doing $12 million a year. I think to a large extent, it's mindset. If we think we can't, then we believe it. And sometimes I find people are happy in their hole and they don't want a ladder. And you can't help those people.
Dang. Dr. Ivan Meisner, final question, the best advice you ever got on the subject of success, or the best quote you ever loved on success?
All right. Well, I'm going to cheat and give you a couple or three. My favorite one is success is the uncommon application of common knowledge. But I have another one. And I think, I've got it right here. I have it right here. This is on my desk. I think you can read it. It says, success is the best revenge.
Yes.
And I love that, but that's not my favorite. Here's my favorite. It's from the movie The Imitation Game, and it's not quite about success, but I think it is in many ways. Alan Turing said in the movie The Imitation Game, sometimes it's the very people who no one imagines anything of who do things no one can imagine. Want me to repeat that?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's the very people who no one imagines anything of who can do the things that no one can imagine. What I love about that is that you can be successful. Whether people think that you can or they think you can't, it's up to you. You can do amazing things.
Thank you, Dr. Ivan Meisner. You're on the Big Success Podcast. We're going to be back next week with more for your success. And that's the Big Success Podcast for today. Hopefully you took a lot of notes, learned a whole bunch, and if you need to, go re-listen to it. We dropped a lot of information right there today. Big success is what it's all about. And by the way, if you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button so you're here with us every single week on the Big Success Podcast. I'm Brad Sugars. That's BS. Big success is what we're shooting for. Check the show notes for all the links. Make sure you follow through. Keep learning. Keep coming back. Oh, and by the way, share this with any of your friends who you know are up for success. I'll see you next week on the Big Success Podcast.
You've been listening to the Big Success Podcast with the #1 business coach in the world, Brad Sugars. To learn more about how to achieve business and personal success, as well as how to level up or listen to past episodes, visit www.bradsugars.com.